We're very delighted today to have a Western graduate back with us to bring greetings on behalf of the state of Kentucky as we add another addition to this property owned by the state of Kentucky. Would you welcome a graduate of Western, Lieutenant Governor Steve Henry.
Well, it's a pleasure to be on the Hill on another homecoming. It's been a few. Certainly, it's a pleasure to be here today for such an important occasion. His record as a coach, I think all of us could probably quote you the figures, but almost 759 wins and just over 1,000 games here at Western. And at the time of his retirement in 1964, I guess most of you all know this, that he was the winningest coach in the U.S. history at that time. And I think if you look back since his days coming here in 1922, it's just astounding how many years he coached. And I think if you go back and look at the record books, Ray Meyer and I think Fogg Allen at Kansas were the only two coaches that even come close to him. And so I think that he brought a great deal of recognition. And I know that my folks talk about the Diddle days, and they're not that old, but they were back about that time. And they still tell me stories about him. But I think if you go back and look at the many things he did for Western, and all of us being Hilltoppers, we can appreciate that. But he really brought forth not just a basketball coaching career, but so many things that if you look about life, more life, and the spirit makes the master. I mean, those are truly traditions and the mottos that we all stand for today, and things that have all helped us get where we are in life. And so we think that Coach Diddle was a true tradition in Kentucky. You know, the type that, that President Downing, people like that, and President Cherry, people like that have really made all our lives different here at Western. And the governor wanted to be here for this event, but we just dedicated almost dedicated a bridge in Owensboro. We announced a bridge being built in Owensboro just a few minutes ago, and the governor was tied up, but he wanted to be here. He'll be here later, my understanding is, for the homecoming game. But I really had to leave early to get here because it's a very special occasion for me as a Hilltopper to really talk about what my parents told me about Coach Diddle, and I want to be here today. Thank you all so much, and I know the rain's going to hold off for us on homecoming today. Thank you.
We're very proud of Steve Henry and all that he has accomplished. He was a great student here and student regent, and of course has established a wonderful record as a doctor and now as Lieutenant Governor of this state. So thank you. A number of major contributors played an important part in bringing this idea to reality, and I'd like to recognize some of those. The principal contributors. Let me mention those. Let's wait till we hear all of the names and then applaud, and I'll tell you who they are. Mr. and Ms., and I want you to stand, please, when I call your name. Mr. and Ms. Darrell Carrier of Oakland. We've all heard of Darrell. He's in the back here. Ronnie and Joan Clark of Franklin. Ronnie. Bob Hensley, Robert Hensley of Munfordville. I saw Bobby way back over here on the left. Leichhardt, I'll get it in a minute, Mitchell Nursery here in Bowling Green. Thank you, Mitchell. Ronnie and Ann Sheffer of Bowling Green, of Henderson, Owensboro, and Louisville, and I don't know where all they are now, but all over. We appreciate them very, very much. Stuart Ritchie Construction of Bowling Green, and Denny and Carol Wedge of Bowling Green. Would you join me in thanking them? They're our principal contributors. Next level, we had some sponsorship contributors, and that includes, and if those people would stand, we'll recognize you as a group. The Bowling Green American Legion Post 23, Roger Miller, Commander. Gene Haskett of Jackson, Michigan. Lieutenant Colonel and Mrs. Owen Lawson of Owensboro. Mr. and Ms. Bobby Mcguire of Decatur, Georgia. Stand up, Bobby. Come on. Jim and Annette Richards of Bowling Green. Colonel Miss Ed Stansberry of Largo. I saw Ed earlier. Here he is over here. Mr. and Miss George Warren of Seabury. And the WKU W Club. Would you help me recognize them, please? More than 300 friends, of course, who are listed in your program as contributors to the commemorative brick program. And as you'll look around here, you'll see the layout of bricks. And that's included in your program and on the display here as well, if you want to know where those bricks are located. And a limited number of bricks are still available. So those of you that, as you look around and you say, gosh, I'd like to be a part of this. Don, raise your hand. Don Smith over here, Fred Hensley, Ron Beck, all of those that you saw earlier, stand ready to accept your willingness to be a part of this contribution. There's still room for you. This park will be a lasting remembrance to Mr. Diddle. His traditions will be preserved by recognizing all that he has done in coaching our men's and women's basketball teams, and of course, as some of you know, our football teams and baseball teams and everything else here at one time or another. It'll be a centerpiece of this friendly, caring campus, and that was the intent. And of course, he was such a center part of our campus in terms of being a friendly person. This will be a place where faculty, staff, and students will gather for social and intellectual events. We see an awful lot of gatherings here of just meeting someone for lunch. And we'll have entertainment here or readings here or whatever happens. And we think it'll be a very positive part of this campus. College campuses should be a place where people can come together and visit socially and intellectually. And we think this being right in the heart of the campus will do just that. Several features of this park, of course, it's located at the former site of the Diddle home and Diddle dorm, which is right here, right where some of you are sitting in this direction. We preserve the archway from the home, and it will be a focal point of the park, which I think you've already seen. Some of you who live in Bowling Green know that this is the second time around on this arch. First time it went up, it came down again. But Gary Costello came back and put steel in this now, and he said it is here, and it will stay here. Many bricks contain special messages, and I hope you have taken the time or will take the time to look at those messages that are on some of these bricks. I took the time last week to come just walk around here very slowly, and there's some very touching notes here from a lot of people. But the most special messages come from the hearts of two of Coach Diddle's former players. And we're going to ask them to come up and say a few words to you. I'm going to first call up Bobby Mcguire. Bobby, if you'll start up, I'll start talking about you. Bobby is a 1951 graduate of Western. He and his wife Charlotte now live in Atlanta. He played basketball and baseball for Mr. Diddle. He's a member of the Kentucky High School Athletic Hall of Fame and is a past president of the Western Kentucky University National Alumni Association. Please welcome Bobby Mcguire.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President, and welcome to all of you who have come to celebrate the life of Edgar Allan Diddle. Can you hear me all right? Good. In olden times, and some of the great stories we've all read growing up, most stories started with once upon a time. And so this one does also. Because once upon a time, a giant of a man lived here. In a sense, you could call him a king because he had a court. Not just a basketball court, but living in that home, in that castle that we called in lay terms Diddle's dorm. Besides the king lived Louise, the queen. And she was for scores and scores and scores of young men a mother away from home. She'd help mend your broken heart while she sewed a button on your cuff for the dance that night. She was our mother away from home. Living in that home also was Sister. She could stand her ground with any man, scrap with you, and never once, though, did she fail to give you those twinkling eyes and that sparkling smile. And she had a dog named Betty Boo. Betty Boo either bit at me or hit me 16 times while I was in Diddle's dorm. And the young prince who lived there was my roommate for 4 years, Eddie Diddle Jr. And to this day, I want to say something that I've thought. Can you imagine having to play basketball under your daddy, much less if he was E.A. Diddle? And I take my hat off to him to this day also for the way he did it in such a spectacular and marvelous way as a starting guard and a star for Western Kentucky University. In that home was what we would call an executive housekeeper, Clara Whitney. Last night, Eddie and I were rooming together here, and I said, Eddie, how long was Claire in the home? He said, right at 50 years. You know, she said in life that Ed Diddle was the greatest friend she ever had in life. She was an Afro-American, and she was absolutely the keenest spirit, smiling and talking and fussing at us for not picking her clothes up and cook you a good little something to eat too. But she could take the bottom of your day and turn it into the top of the morning. Those were the players, the family for the players that came, and they came, and it was here that we learned to become men. It was here we learned from the master what integrity and character meant. And it was here we learned that simple things mean a lot to people, that little things mean a lot. We learned at the feet of the Master. But as a wise man once told the king, I say to you in all your glory, that all this shall pass away. And so, some 27 years ago, Coach Ed Diddle went to his eternal glory. So the king stepped down, but the crown has stayed on. And the dorm is down. The castle is down. But the memories have stayed on. And looking back in golden slow motion to those days, I can't help but join with Sophocles when he said, as we are here today, one must wait until the evening to see how splendid the day has been. Amen. So for one bright, shining moment, scores and scores of young men in the castle, for one bright, shining moment, we had Camelot on this ground. We know of his wins, his record, his national acclaim. So much has been said about it, it gets you confused between the man and the myth and the coach and the legend. But I submit to you that the greatest part of Mr. Diddle was the people person Diddle, with all respect to the coach and the record. It is the profound influence that he had on so many people, I think, that today lingers on. He was so gracious, almost timid to a point at times in the way he'd accept plaudits. Oh, I don't deserve that, yeah, you know. Well, Mr. Diddle, let the people be the judge. I have extrapolated just a few one-liners from individuals who have said things about Coach Diddle, just a few of the many, many thousands. I hired in life the Middle Tennessee coach away from coaching and got him into the publishing industry with me and Mr. Ronnie Clark. It's Charlie Greer from Nashville, Tennessee. He loved and worshiped Mr. Diddle. He said, Bobby, you'd go in there to play him. He'd bow and scrape anything you wanted, anything you needed. He treated you like an angel. He was angelic. On the other hand, he'd get you on the court and take you on like an assassin. He said, I never said that out loud, but I often refer to him in my mind as the angelic assassin. From other voices in the 30s, Hugh Poland, baseball pitcher, Western, went on with the New York Giants. Major league pitcher said, Mr. Diddle is the fairest human being I ever knew. The fairest human being I ever knew. Coach Ted Hornback said, next to my father, he was closer to me to life than any person. Mr. Diddle never uttered to me an unkind word in my life. I roomed with Eddie Diddle Jr. for 4 years, and like his father, both high-strung and very effervescent, he never uttered to me in his life an unkind word. We never had an argument in 4 years. We never have and we never will. Because you see, they come from noble stock. Johnny Oldham said, he's the greatest basketball recruiter that ever lived. He was a profound influence on my life and career. Jim Pickens said he was my second father. He's the very best friend I ever had. Dee Gibson says we should follow his life, the way he loved people and the compassion for people and the things he did, and make it our role model. I never met John Scarborough, Professor John Scarborough. I'm sorry that I didn't get to know him. I have heard so many wonderful things about that man. Clem Haskins yesterday his voice broke when he was referring to Dr. John Scarborough. He said, Ed Diddle makes shambles of the saying that no man is irreplaceable. I would say, keep on swim right.
Talk fast.
All right, talk fast. Okay. I'm going to put these notes away and just talk. Well, I'll just, all right. All right, talk fast. Outside, other voices away from the campus. He said he was a profound leader in state and national basketball. He is beloved on our campus. Dr. Robert Martin, President, Eastern Kentucky University. Ed Diddle is the most colorful coach I ever knew, said another man. He's a fierce competitor on the court, and his players are great competitors, but off the court, they're gentlemen. Ray Meyer, coached DePaul University. Peck Hickman said, Ed Diddle was closer to his boys than any coach that ever lived. I was one of them. The biggest part of Ed Diddle was his heart. And a man in New York City said, he certainly won the appeal of the fans in New York City with that red towel and that effervescent spirit. They added greatly to his immense popularity here. Ned Irish, President, Madison Square Garden. And they go on and on. Mr. Diddle drove with me to Hazard, Kentucky, my hometown. He was going to speak at an athletic banquet. They were trying to raise funds for a new field house. And we got in the car and drove. It's a long way from here to Hazard on two-lane road, especially. Didn't have any superhighways. He said, Bobby, I didn't know there's this many coal trucks in the world. And when we got near Hazard, it was a foggy afternoon. He said, you can't see it for the gun smoke. He told them that night at the banquet, and you've heard him say it, you that were around him, build it for them while they can see it and have it. Do it for yourselves, because you can't smell the roses when they pull the sod up over your face. And they did. Later on, they built that gymnasium in the field house. And that night when we were leaving, they offered him his honorarium. And I'll just never forget, he said, I couldn't do that. Thank you, very graciously. He said, this is where Bobby lives. On the way back home, I thanked him for that trip and what he had done. He said, Bobby, I want to tell you one thing. The things we do for ourselves are buried with us. The things we do for others live forever. And if I had to write one word on a big postcard with a marker and hold it in front of you, I would write the word others. I have a dear friend in Atlanta who never met him, never saw him, heard about him. He's a young entrepreneur, very successful, but his background is Salvation Army. He minded the kettles on the street and played trumpet when he was growing up. And his father was colonel in Atlanta, so he knew about the word others. And he makes me tell Diddle stories, and when I give him one that he especially likes, he rubs his hands. I can tell when I get the good ones going with it. He is so successful, but he still likes, as I do, the simple things, like Mr. Diddle did. We both like those new potatoes and well-seasoned green beans, corn on the cob, little onion head. We take that cornbread and crumble it in. He uses buttermilk, I use sweet milk. We use a lot of pepper and salt in that crumble in. He has two stories that are his favorites. I'll tell them to you quickly. In the early 50s, I was here. Fort Knox had a basketball team coming to play an exhibition game. They had a black player then, we called him, Afro-American now. And the question was, will he play on Western's floor? Well, the media got it and the press got it, and everybody was talking about it, but they had never asked Coach Diddle. Finally, the time came, and they said, Coach, what do you think? What are you going to do? They listened. He said, if he can fight for his country, he can play on my floor. There were no more questions. He played. He broke the color line. Mr. Diddle did for the athlete. And finally, at his funeral, Eddie Diddle Jr. met me at the funeral home before visiting hours, and he said, Bobby, let's go in. There's nobody in there. But just as we started into the room where Mr. Diddle was in the room, there was a man sitting in coveralls. Looked to me like he'd been working. And Eddie said, wait just a minute. Wait a minute. He said, Bobby said, that man didn't have a job. His wife didn't have a job. No food, children. Mr. Diddle would Daddy would take hams and turkey to him and groceries. See, we can all take the December ham or the Thanksgiving turkey. Mr. Diddle was taking the February turkey and the July ham when no one was watching. And so Mr. Diddle had said, Mr. Leachman, when this man had no job, I believe we got a man might help you. And he did, and they trained him and he became one of his best mechanics. And what he had done during the day was 3 or 4 times come back to the funeral home. He was sitting there still thanking, on and on, Mr. Diddle. I'll end with Mr. DeVoto's presentation. I told you about my friend who had never seen him. Went to dinner with him. Our wives went one night, years ago. He was tense when I sat down and said hello. I could tell something was on his mind. And finally, he reached under the table and brought out a beautiful presentation. Matted framed. On the left-hand side is that famous picture of Coach Diddle when he's leaving the gymnasium for the last time, with his top coat on and that hat, that red towel, Johnny, over his shoulder. Black and white, Louisville Courier-Journal made it. It's classic. That was matted beautifully on the left-hand side of that presentation. On the right-hand side, in beautiful handwritten calligraphy, were these words, and I shall not try to improve upon them. And when this man has come and gone forever, what then shall be the true meaning of his life? It is the unending quest for honor and excellence that he inspired in the hearts of those he left behind. I gave that to Eddie Diddle Jr. He's the one who should have it. That's what a man thought about him who had never seen him, who had never watched him, but just heard about him. And he still does this. Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. Great job. Thank you very much, Bobby. Next, let me call up Ronnie Clark. Ronnie, if you'd come on up. Ronnie's a 1957 graduate of Western, holds 3 degrees from this institution. He and his wife, Joan, a former Western cheerleader, live in Franklin. He's the chief executive officer of Franklin Bank and Trust. And he was a longtime former WKU regent, Ronnie Clark. Ronnie?
Thank you. Johnny, let's have the benediction. I believe after Bobby spoke, I thought, well, if the rain will just rain, get on coming, and Eddie and I'll get off the hook. A lot of you here in the audience know Ed Diddle personally. A lot of you did not. So before I make any remarks, I want to tell you about 2 or 3 things about him that was particularly important. Number one, his voice was different than most people. He was like a general. He was like a drill sergeant. And when he said, D, get up here. Or Rascoe, I want to see you. Or Johnny, what you been doing? Or Bobby, get out of bed, get to work. Or Eddie, where's Teddy? Where's Betty Boo? More likely. But he had that particular voice that when he rang it out, people stopped and listened, and that's one of the characteristics that made him such a good man. Secondly, about Mr. Diddle, he might have seemed funny, as Don said yesterday about one of his colleagues, he was silly. Mr. Diddle was a very intelligent man, but sometimes he would give you the impression that he was not thinking too clearly, because he was the master of the malaprop, meaning that he would say one thing and think another many times. And some of those sayings that he would say is, for example, D, he went to the bakery. He goes in the bakery, and the lady knows him, says, Coach Diddle, how are you? Fine. What can I do for you? I want the chocolate cake. He said, do you want me to cut it up for you? Yeah, just go ahead and cut it up. How do you want me to cut it? Do you want me to cut it in 2 or 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces? Oh my God, no. Just cut it in 2. I can't eat 6. But most of the stories that we hear about him are come from the people who love him and respect him. And I will tell a few on some of his players who loved him, not only loved him, but respected him. I picked these up from talking with these former players. One was Jim Pickens, who's here today. Jim Pickens was one of his favorite players. Jim went to someplace over in southeastern Kentucky one day one Sunday and played baseball against Mr. Diddle's wishes. He came back on Monday, and Mr. Diddle met him in the goalpost, said, "Jim, I heard you pitched yesterday." He said, "Oh, I just pitched a couple innings." He said, "More like 11. He said, "I want you to turn your uniform in. You're not going to Louisville tomorrow. Just forget it. Turn it in." Pickens turned his uniform in. Western goes to Louisville and gets slaughtered. Come back, Bowling Green on Tuesday. Coach Diddle's in the goalpost on Wednesday. "Pickens, where were you yesterday?" Said, "Well, I thought you told me to turn my uniform in." He said, "I just meant for one day." The story on Bob Lavoie, who was inducted into the Hall of Fame 2 weeks ago or so. Bob Lavoie was on the train coming back from a Florida trip. Mr. Diddle had his oranges placed up in the rack for Eddie and Mary Jo and all of them to enjoy. And Bob Lavoie decided he'd just get those oranges and pass them out. So they had a feast on oranges. Mr. Diddle comes to the train, said, "Okay, I see somebody stole my oranges. I want them back." And of course he couldn't get them back. So he said, "I'm coming back in 30 minutes. And if those oranges are not up here where I can see them, I'm having trouble with someone." So he came back and the oranges weren't there, and he said, "I tell you what's happening. I've got a thief on the train, and he's going off this scholarship. I'm going to break his plate." Said he'll never play for this team again. And Lavoie stood up and said, "Coach, I did it. I got the oranges." He said, "Lavoie, why don't you shut up?" He said, "I just remembered I ate every one of them." Of course, Lavoie was an All-American, like Bobby Rascoe, sitting out here today. The story on Bobby is that he was playing in the finals of one of the cherished tournaments. Western had a 1-point lead, timeout. Coach Diddle said, "Bobby, sit on it. We got a 1-point lead, 30 seconds to go, run the clock." Rascoe gets it out and starts dribbling. And like all of those great All-Americans that played here, Johnny Oldham, Dee Gibson, Ralph Crosswaite, Clem Haskins, Jim McDaniels, he sees an opening and he couldn't stand it. He had to go for it. And he rolled in there and shot a crip and missed it. Western loses by 1. They go to the dressing room after the game. Bobby's in the corner with his towel over his head crying, "I lost the game, Coach." Coach Diddle came over and consoled him, said, "Bobby, don't worry about it. You didn't lose the game." Said, "I lost the game when I gave you the scholarship." As I said, Johnny Oldham, Dero Downing, Clem Haskins was here last night, Jim McDaniels, Jim Richards, a great coach back there, Dee Gibson, all of them are here. And here I am up here. How did I get here? Well, I got here because when I graduated from high school, I didn't have anywhere to go. Nobody wanted me. So I wrote him a letter and told him I was really a great guard, that he was a great player, he was the greatest coach I ever heard of, and I couldn't figure out why I hadn't heard from him. So I mailed it. He calls up my coach, says, "You got an idiot down here, don't you?" I said, "Well." So he invited me. The only place I'd been to visit so far, prior to writing that letter, was to Murray. I went down to Coach Hodges' outfit, and there was a guy down there, there's an All-American named Howie Chittenden. Mr. Diddle said his name is Chittenden, not Howie, not Crittenden, but Chittenden. But they had an All-American Chittenden in Murray, and so I knew I didn't want to go there. And of course, that Chittenden was the same guy that Mr. Diddle said he didn't want because he couldn't play. Actually, Howie wouldn't sign here, and Mr. Diddle said he couldn't play, and every time we went to play Murray, he'd always fire us up by saying, "Chittenden wanted to come, but I wouldn't take him, and now he's trying to beat us." You All-Americans and people that Coach Diddle loved, a little poem, it goes like this. "Wouldn't this old world be better if folks we meet would say, 'I know something good about you,' and treat us just that way? Wouldn't it be fine and dandy if each hand clasp, warm and true, carried with it this assurance, 'I know something good about you'? Wouldn't life be lots more pleasant if the good that's in us all were the only things about us that people bothered to recall? Wouldn't life be a lot more happy if we'd praise the good we see, for there's such a lot of goodness in the worst of you and me? Wouldn't it be nice to practice this way of thinking too? You know something good about me, and I know something good about you. Thank you.
Thank you, President Meredith, and it is indeed a great pleasure for me to represent the Diddle family on this great occasion. It's something that will be remembered long after probably we're all gone. It's something that's forever. So it is really a great thing. After Bobby and Ronnie, that's a pretty tough act to follow. And I just want to make a few notes. Yesterday, before I was coming up to the luncheon, I went over to my office and had a speech in there I was going to bring for this occasion, and I tried to open the door. The key broke in the door, so you're very lucky. I don't have a speech written. We all know about his record and championships and boys he coached at All-Americans and all that. Question I'd like to pose to all you ex-players out there and the people that knew him: why was he so successful and others weren't, like Cam Henderson, Marshall, Harlan Hodges at Murray, and many others? But they were successful but never really reached where he did. And they say that, you know, what was it that he had that the other coaches didn't quite have? And I don't think any of us can answer that question. I think one thing, I think he had a crystal ball. I think he saw things that were going to happen way before they happened. He could see a boy with big hands and big feet that no one else particularly wanted, and they turned out to be really great players. Or he saw back years ago that there probably needed to be a little more entertainment at basketball games and things. So he goes up to London, Kentucky, and gets the Cook twins and maybe Johnson, and they performed at halftime, and they put on shows, and that added a little zip to the program. Two or three things, I think little things that I remember that he said that have stuck with me through the years. One is, never ask a man what he does for a living. Ask him how well he does his job. I said, I don't care if he's a bank president. He doesn't do his job. He's not as good as the janitor there at the bank that does do his job. And he said, when you shake a man's hand, grip his hand, look him in the eye, and don't give him that old cold fish handshake and look out the window. And I think there's a few of the things that have meant a lot to me through the years. He, talking about coaching, I remember one time a lot of the sports writers started a thing going around, said, well, you know, Coach Diddle really isn't doing the coaching. Mr. Hornback's doing all the coaching, and he's really the coach, not Coach Diddle. So they asked him about that, and he said, that's probably true. He does a lot of the coaching, but he said, I'm not as dumb as you give me credit. He said, hell, I'm the one that hired him. So I think that was one of the things that he did so well, was foreseeing the future and what would come later. In closing, I would like to say that it is indeed a great pleasure and honor for me to represent him on this occasion. For this man was very unpredictable, very unforgettable, and he was my father, my coach, and my best friends. Thank you all very much for coming.
Good job. Good job. Well, this is a great day, and we could spend the rest of the afternoon finding ways to talk about honoring this man who gave so much to this university. We think this park will quickly become a favorite place for students to gather, for people. Now, I know a lot of y'all are interested here, but we just had a little problem. She's fine. So we could spend the rest of the afternoon telling stories. You know, I've heard 1,000 of those stories since I've been here, and they're wonderful stories about Mr. Diddle. Ron Sheffer shared one with me one day about when he was on playing baseball for Mr. Diddle, and they were on their way to Henderson. And about halfway there, or on their way to Murray, and about halfway there, a bus went by, and one of them went up and tapped Mr. Diddle on the shoulder and said, "Mr. Diddle, I think that was the Murray team that just went by." So he said, "Pull this bus over." So he pulled over, and he got his billfold out and got his schedule out, and he said, "Daggone, we're home." So they turned the bus around and went back home. So I mean, there's 1,000 of those out there. So Western has made a concerted effort over the years to keep his memory alive. This park will be a transformation of this site into a focal point of beauty on this campus. It's a fitting tribute to this man who cared so much about this university. Someone said to me earlier this week, said, "I sure hated to see Diddle Dorm come down. It was such a great legacy and such a great landmark to see, but now we have a place to be at where the site of that great landmark stood." So I think that was a very nice statement, and it gave another view to me. And of course, one of the things that Mr. Diddle felt so strongly about, as all of you know, whoever was around him at all, was how he felt about grass. And if you'll notice today, we've got several of these signs around here that says, "Mr. Diddle says, keep off the grass." Now, I don't expect our students to steal it, but I'm worried about the alumni. So you leave those signs alone now. Don't you take up one today and take it home with you. I want to tell one quick story on Jack Glasser, who was here just a moment ago. I don't know if Jack's still here or not. Jack told me soon after I came to Bowling Green about Mr. Diddle and his experience. And Jack, as you all know, was a great high school basketball player and baseball player. He may have set the record for college high in terms of points scored, and felt pretty good about himself, but what he really wanted to do was play for Western. And he was not getting a look from Mr. Diddle. And he said he was cutting across campus one day, had a basketball under his arm, going to go shoot some, and he looked up, and here came Mr. Diddle coming down the street in his car, and he pulled over right by Jack, rolled down his window and said, "Come here." And Jack went over and he said, "This is it. I'm finally going to get that scholarship." And he said, "Boy, get off the grass." Jack said his heart went down in his shoes, and as you know, he's a great baseball player at Western, but not a basketball player. So we thank all of you for coming. We invite you to spend time here this afternoon reading the bricks, reading the nice messages that are on so many of those, and enjoying this beautiful day. We'll ask Don Smith and Ron Beck to sort of hang around close to the front in case some others would like to be a partner in this venture by buying some more bricks and adding to that cause. As you know, right now the men's basketball team is having a scrimmage in Diddle Arena, so if you're in that basketball fever mind right now and you want to see some more, go down and see the Hilltoppers. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you. Bobby, you did a great job.